The air was crisp that morning in Banff National Park, the kind of cold that made your breath linger like a whisper. Most tourists were still tucked in their cabins, and the trails lay silent under a blanket of early frost. But not Daniel Whitmore. At exactly 6:12 a.m. on October 17, 1992, he checked out his ranger radio at the Stone Creek outpost, wrote his name in the logbook with neat, looping cursive, and stepped outside for what should have been a routine patrol of Trail 37. He never came back. There were no cries for help over the radio, no signs of a struggle, no footprints leading off trail. It was as if the forest swallowed him whole. Daniel wasn't the kind of man to disappear. He was 49 years old, a military vet, precise, dependable, and deeply familiar with the terrain. Locals respected him. Fellow rangers relied on him. He knew the backcountry better than most hikers knew their backyards. And yet, that day, not a single camera trap, search dog, or aerial sweep caught a glimpse of him. For weeks, search teams combed the mountains ridge to ridge, foot by foot. His truck was found parked neatly near the trailhead, keys still in the ignition. His backpack was gone, which made sense. But his canteen, oddly enough, was still full. News spread fast. A park ranger with a spotless record, gone without a trace in one of Canada's most visited parks. Conspiracy forums lit up. Some whispered of wild animals, others suspected foul play. A few even claimed the area was cursed, that Trail 37 had bad energy. But officially, the RCMP called it an unsolved disappearance and eventually closed the case. Visitors returned to Banff. Time marched on, and Daniel Whitmore's name faded into the fog of unresolved mysteries until 13 years later, when a seasonal worker stumbled across something deep in the forest, an old ranger outpost, not marked on any recent maps. Overgrown, nearly buried in pine needles. And inside, a radio, powered by an external car battery, still transmitting faint static. Every few hours it emitted the same eerie signal, just static, no voice, no pattern. But every signal burst began at exactly 6:12 a.m. The same time Daniel had checked out his radio, in the exact frequency range he'd used, and no one could explain why. What happened to Daniel Whitmore? Who left the radio on? And why was it still broadcasting after more than a decade of silence? Banff's most chilling mystery had just come roaring back to life. When the discovery was reported to Parks Canada, officials arrived at the scene within hours. The outpost was barely standing, wood rotted, roof partially collapsed, moss growing up the walls. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. But the CB radio on the old steel desk was in pristine condition. Its power source, a battered car battery, had been replaced at least once. That was the first strange thing. The second was the signal itself. It was broadcasting static on a park ranger frequency no longer in use, a frequency that had been retired shortly after Daniel's disappearance in 1992. And yet, the radio continued to hum every morning at 6:12 a.m., without fail. No fingerprints were found on the device. No bootprints around the outpost. It was as if the forest had sealed it away, except for the radio. As investigators swept the area, they found remnants of an old trail, now overgrown and nearly invisible. It curved away from the main path, the one Daniel was supposed to patrol. Why would he have taken that detour? No official report mentioned it, no maps listed it. It wasn't even in the ranger handbook. The seasonal worker who found the cabin, 24-year-old Jake Spencer, told reporters he hadn't been looking for anything in particular. He'd simply followed a strange sound he kept hearing during his lunch breaks. Like a broken whistle through the trees, he said. When asked why he hadn't reported it sooner, Jake admitted he thought it was wind, or maybe an echo from hikers. But it never stopped. Not once in 2 weeks. That was what pushed him to investigate. Daniel Whitmore's family was notified immediately. His sister, a retired nurse living in Calgary, broke down on camera when the press reached out. "I never believed he was dead," she said. Something was always off about how they closed the case. The park rangers, too, were shaken. Several recalled rumors from the early 90s, stories of lights in the trees, strange echoing voices near Trail 37, even one account of a compass spinning uncontrollably near the ridge. RCMP reopened the case quietly, avoiding media frenzy. But locals were already buzzing. Some believed Daniel had survived, gone off-grid, maybe mentally unstable. Others theorized someone else was using his radio. But that didn't explain the frequency, the time of the broadcast, or how no human signs were found at the cabin. And then came the final twist of the week. An audio technician analyzing the static found subtle modulations in the frequency. Tiny dips, like Morse code. It wasn't just noise, it was a pattern. What was the radio trying to say? And who or what was behind the signal? The third day of the search brought reinforcements from neighboring provinces. Helicopters scoured the thick forest canopy while K9 units trudged tirelessly through winding trails. Volunteers, locals who had grown up wandering Banff's paths, joined the effort, mapping out every corner of the region Glenn had last been seen. But as the hours turned into days, frustration mounted. Not a single boot print, not a shred of his uniform, not even the rustle of a broken branch that might suggest someone had passed through. It was as though Glenn had evaporated into the trees. Elaine, Glenn's sister, arrived from Calgary the following afternoon. She was pale and trembling, but determined. Her presence seemed to reignite something in the team. She spoke to reporters, urging anyone who had been in the park around that time to come forward, no matter how small the detail. But no hikers remembered passing a ranger. No campers heard anything strange. It was as if Glenn had never left the ranger station. When investigators reviewed the logbook from the station, the last thing Glenn had written was a short note. Heading west, checking Creek Trail near Loop 6. That trail was well known for its isolation, rarely used except by experienced rangers. A small group was sent to follow it. Midway down, they found something chilling. Glenn's radio, muddy, damaged, and turned off, wedged between two rocks by the side of the path. It made no sense. Glenn would never have turned off his radio, not on a solo patrol. And the positioning, hidden almost deliberately, sent chills through the team. A forensic team examined it on the spot. No blood, no signs of struggle, just a faint, cracked fingerprint on the side, too distorted to match. Rumors started to spread among the locals. Some said Glenn had discovered something he wasn't supposed to. Others whispered of old stories about strange things in the deeper parts of the park, tales the elders used to tell around campfires, but no one truly believed anymore. But nothing concrete emerged. Days turned into weeks. Glenn's photo was plastered across Banff and nearby towns. Elaine stayed for 2 months, checking with police every day, handing out flyers, sitting in silence outside the ranger station. But eventually, she had to return to Calgary. Her brother, like so many others swallowed by the wilderness, had become another name on a long, sorrowful list. And just like that, Banff went quiet again. But in the stillness of the forest, the question lingered. Why would a seasoned ranger walk into the woods, never to return, and leave behind only a broken radio? Theories began to grow roots, and one man, a former ranger who knew Glenn well, would not let it go. That man, Tom Herrick, believed something darker was at play. He would spend the next decade trying to prove it. By the third week of the search, the momentum was slowing. Media crews had packed up, volunteers had returned to their daily lives, and the harsh Canadian winter was threatening to close in on the park. The number of active searchers dwindled to a skeleton crew. For Tom's family, this was a nightmare relived every morning. Linda spent her days making calls, urging officials not to give up, while his father, an aging veteran, wrote daily letters to the Park Service demanding answers. Their frustration wasn't just about the lack of progress. It was about the feeling that Tom had been forgotten by the very institution he gave his life to. Rumors began to spread in nearby towns. Some believed Tom had staged his own disappearance. Others speculated about wild animal attacks, illegal operations hidden deep in the woods, or something more sinister, military experiments or secret bunkers beneath the park. These theories, however outlandish, found fuel in the silence. The RCMP held a press conference on October 30th, a month after Tom's disappearance, to assure the public that the case was still active. But no new evidence had surfaced. Nothing had been found. No torn fabric, no blood, no broken branches. Not even the scent dogs had picked up anything beyond the last sighting point. Then came a call that changed everything. A hiker named David Kessler reported hearing a strange noise while camping near Icefields Parkway, a persistent static buzzing from an area far from any trail. He'd followed it for nearly an hour before it abruptly stopped. The story was dismissed at first, but when the name Kessler came up in a local report, Tom's sister, who was reading every article she could find, pushed for authorities to follow up. Investigators returned to the area 2 days later, but found nothing but twisted underbrush and cold silence. Meanwhile, Tom's ranger cabin was cleared out. His personal items, photos, notebooks, a broken watch, were returned to his family. A map he'd marked with red ink caught the attention of a junior officer. It contained handwritten notes referencing a place called Shadow Ridge, a rarely traversed cliffside far from the main paths. Strangely, no official records or maps labeled the area with that name. When asked, senior rangers shrugged. "Old nickname," one said. "We don't go there. Too dangerous." That name, Shadow Ridge, would stick with the investigation for years to come. It sparked renewed interest among online sleuths and cold case communities. People obsessed over aerial footage, analyzing terrain and hypothesizing about its possible connection to Tom's fate. Still, nothing concrete emerged. And so, as the leaves fell and Banff prepared for winter, the park ranger who had once walked those woods with authority became nothing more than a ghost story told in hushed voices around campfires. For over a decade, there had been no trace of Owen Henderson. The forests of Banff had swallowed him whole, and with each passing year, hope dimmed like the sun behind the park's looming ridges. The rangers who once worked beside him had either retired or transferred, and the new generation only heard fragments of the story, passed down like folklore around campfires. Some spoke of Owen as a dedicated but overly curious ranger. Others claimed he had become paranoid near the end, convinced something was watching him from deep in the woods. These stories, half whispers and half warnings, faded into the pine-scented air, becoming part of the park's eerie legend. Despite the years of silence, one man hadn't given up. Owen's younger brother, Dean, a geography teacher from Alberta, with no experience in law enforcement, Dean refused to believe his brother had simply vanished without a trace. He made the long drive to Banff every year on the anniversary of Owen's disappearance, walking the same path from the ranger station to Sulphur Creek. Locals came to expect it. Some even offered help. Dean would search the ravines, photograph eroded trails, and speak with hikers who had no idea who Owen was. He kept a thick binder at home full of maps, sightings, notes from psychics, and newspaper clippings. To him, the case wasn't cold. It was buried. In 2004, on the 12th anniversary, Dean noticed something he hadn't before. A small wooden trail sign nearly rotted off its post, pointing toward a section of forest that had been closed off after a mudslide in the early 90s. The trail, once called Raven's Path, was overgrown and missing from most current maps. He asked around but found no ranger who had walked it in years. Something about the forgotten trail gnawed at him. He added it to his binder, marking it with red ink and a question mark. If Owen had gone rogue, exploring off-limits areas, maybe that was where he'd gone. But just as Dean began planning a new search, something strange happened. In late April 2005, an off-season maintenance crew working on power lines near the edge of Banff reported hearing faint static through their radios. Thinking it was interference, they ignored it, until one of the workers, a retired army technician, identified the sound as a CB channel transmission. "It's a Ranger frequency," he told his supervisor, "and it's on a loop." Authorities were contacted. A team of park personnel swept the area with portable receivers. The signal led them deep into a remote, forested section of the park, far beyond any trail or campsite. The radio pulse grew louder, spiking at irregular intervals. When they finally found the source, no one could believe it. A moss-covered backpack, a ranger's badge, and beside a fallen log, half buried under pine needles and snowmelt, a CB radio, still transmitting. For over a decade, there had been no trace of Owen Henderson. The forests of Banff had swallowed him whole, and with each passing year, hope dimmed like the sun behind the park's looming ridges. The rangers who once worked beside him had either retired or transferred, and the new generation only heard fragments of the story, passed down like folklore around campfires. Some spoke of Owen as a dedicated but overly curious ranger. Others claimed he had become paranoid near the end, convinced something was watching him from deep in the woods. These stories, half whispers and half warnings, faded into the pine-scented air, becoming part of the park's eerie legend. Despite the years of silence, one man hadn't given up: Owen's younger brother, Dean. A geography teacher from Alberta with no experience in law enforcement, Dean refused to believe his brother had simply vanished without a trace. He made the long drive to Banff every year on the anniversary of Owen's disappearance, walking the same path from the ranger station to Sulphur Creek. Locals came to expect it. Some even offered help. Dean would search the ravines, photograph eroded trails, and speak with hikers who had no idea who Owen was. He kept a thick binder at home full of maps, sightings, notes from psychics, and newspaper clippings. To him, the case wasn't cold. It was buried. In 2004, on the 12th anniversary, Dean noticed something he hadn't before. A small wooden trail sign nearly rotted off its post, pointing toward a section of forest that had been closed off after a mudslide in the early 90s. The trail, once called Raven's Path, was overgrown and missing from most current maps. He asked around but found no ranger who had walked it in years. Something about the forgotten trail gnawed at him. He added it to his binder, marking it with red ink and a question mark. If Owen had gone rogue, exploring off-limits areas, maybe that was where he'd gone. But just as Dean began planning a new search, something strange happened. In late April 2005, an off-season maintenance crew working on power lines near the edge of Banff reported hearing faint static through their radios. Thinking it was interference, they ignored it until one of the workers, a retired army technician, identified the sound as a CB channel transmission. "It's a Ranger frequency," he told his supervisor, "and it's on a loop." Authorities were contacted. A team of park personnel swept the area with portable receivers. The signal led them deep into a remote, forested section of the park, far beyond any trail or campsite. The radio pulse grew louder, spiking at irregular intervals. When they finally found the source, no one could believe it. A moss-covered backpack, a ranger's badge, and beside a fallen log, half buried under pine needles and snowmelt, a CB radio, still transmitting. The discovery of the CB radio sent shockwaves through the park's Canada office. After 13 long years with no progress, this was the first solid piece of evidence that Owen Henderson might not have simply gotten lost, but that something else, something much stranger, might have happened. The radio, though corroded by time and weather, was unmistakably a model issued to park rangers in the early 1990s, and it was still operational. The batteries were long dead, but the crew's receivers had picked up an intermittent transmission, just static, sometimes punctuated by short, strange pulses. Some said they heard a click or even a faint voice, but nothing could be confirmed. Forensic analysis of the backpack and its contents yielded little. Most of it had degraded: maps, a flashlight, and a weathered journal too soaked to read. But the ranger badge was intact, and etched on the back was Owen's ID number. It was his. That much was certain. A new search effort was launched within days. Rangers, along with a small team of RCMP officers, fanned out across the Ravens Path area, now reopened for investigation. Dogs were brought in, trained in scent tracking and cadaver detection. Drones scanned the thick canopy, and geologists mapped the terrain to identify any natural hazards, sinkholes, crevasses, or unstable slopes. But despite the surge of activity and modern technology, no other trace of Owen was found. Meanwhile, Dean was called in to identify the recovered items. He stood over the evidence table in stunned silence, his fingers trembling as he touched the badge. He was here, he whispered, eyes watering. He made it this far. Dean asked to join the search, but was denied. Too dangerous, officials said. Still, he camped nearby and kept his own notes, speaking with rangers and logging every detail into his binder, now swollen with 13 years of grief and determination. As news of the radio's discovery spread, the public's interest reignited. Local newspapers picked up the story, and soon national outlets followed. Talk radio shows invited experts in wilderness survival, paranormal investigators, and even former park rangers who had worked with Owen. One caller claimed to have seen a man who looked like him in Jasper back in 1997. Another said they'd heard whispers in the woods during a solo hike near the same area the radio was found. Most were dismissed, but a few were compelling enough to make Dean take notes. It was during this media storm that a retired ranger named Leo Connolly came forward. He had worked Banff's southern trails in the early 90s and had been part of the original search for Owen. "I remember something strange," he said in a recorded interview. "A week before Owen vanished, he came into the office late one night, pale as a ghost. Said he saw someone, or something, deep in the woods. Not a hiker, not an animal. He said it was standing still, watching." Leo's statement breathed new life into a theory long whispered about, but never officially explored, that Owen had seen something in Banff's backcountry, something that may have followed him. The statement from Leo Connolly triggered a shift in the investigation's tone. What had previously been framed as a tragic wilderness disappearance now leaned toward something deeper, something unknown. Dean took Leo's account seriously, and so did a growing number of investigators, both official and independent. The idea that Owen had seen someone, or something, in the woods before he vanished added a layer of unease that hadn't existed before. And then, another chilling discovery emerged. 2 weeks after Leo's interview, a pair of wildlife photographers hiking a seldom-used trail near the Lake Moraine Basin stumbled upon a peculiar sight. A large pine tree with a carved inscription, nearly hidden by moss and time. It read, "Still here, still listening, OH." Below it, a crude symbol had been etched, a circle with 3 vertical lines inside, like a crown or claw. The photographers snapped images and reported the find immediately. Experts couldn't confirm the carving's age, but the initials matched. The inscription was not there during earlier searches. It was either missed entirely or created afterward. If authentic, it suggested Owen had survived for at least some time after his disappearance and left behind a deliberate message. But why? And what was the symbol? The symbol soon caught the attention of indigenous historians familiar with the Banff region. An elder from the Stoney Nakoda Nation contacted investigators privately and said the symbol resembled markings found in a restricted area deep in the forest, a place avoided even by local hunters. "That's not a place you go to look for someone," the elder warned. "It's where things go when they don't want to be found." This revelation added a haunting weight to the case. Dean, exhausted but relentless, demanded they investigate the area mentioned by the elder. The RCMP hesitated, citing safety concerns and lack of jurisdiction over sacred lands. Dean pressed on independently. He assembled a small crew of volunteers, including 2 former rangers, a survivalist, and a drone operator. Their mission: to explore the restricted zone and document everything. After hiking for 3 days, the group reached the edges of the area described by the elder. The forest felt unnaturally quiet. Even the birdsong faded as they moved inward. Cameras captured mist curling low along the forest floor and trees twisted in unnatural shapes. On the second night, one volunteer reported hearing static, clear, rhythmic bursts coming from his emergency radio, which had no batteries installed. The crew pressed forward, and on the 4th day, they found a small cave, partially collapsed, with remnants of a fire ring and what appeared to be shreds of a ranger's uniform. The discovery was chilling. They also found an old map, water-stained and torn, with the same claw-like symbol drawn repeatedly around one area, marked Silent Hill. It wasn't a name anyone recognized, but its presence echoed like a warning. Something had happened out there. And whatever Owen had seen, whatever had been watching him, it might still be watching. The reopening of the case drew attention from media outlets across Canada, sparking renewed interest in the haunting mystery that had never truly faded from public memory. Investigators combed through every piece of the park ranger's personnel file, re-interviewed old witnesses, and examined maps of the area, trying to pinpoint where the original search might have missed something. A team of specialists was brought in to triangulate the signal from the CB radio. Over the years, the broadcasts had become less frequent but still eerily consistent, always transmitting the same static pattern with a faint click every 45 seconds. It was as if something, or someone, was deliberately sending a coded message. Deep in the park's backcountry, a group of trained wilderness trackers and rescue personnel were sent to investigate an area that had previously been inaccessible due to rock slides in the mid-90s. This region had never been fully searched, and it now seemed a likely place to begin. They hiked in for 2 days with satellite equipment, tracing the signal. On the 3rd morning, they picked up the radio frequency, stronger than ever. A nearby ravine, choked with overgrown foliage and fallen logs, echoed faintly with the strange clicking. The team descended the steep incline and discovered remnants of a canvas backpack, partially buried in leaves. Inside was a water-damaged notebook, with faded writing on the inside cover, property of D. Kessler. It was the first direct evidence of the ranger's presence since his disappearance 13 years earlier. But even more shocking was what they found about 15 meters farther down the ravine. A small, metal shelter, camouflaged and nearly invisible from above. Inside the shelter were tattered blankets, rusted food cans, a broken flashlight, and the park ranger's badge pinned to the wall. A makeshift antenna connected to the CB radio still blinked faintly in the corner, the same radio that had been transmitting the static all those years. And next to it sat a journal, meticulously wrapped in plastic, with the first entry dated 3 days after the ranger went missing. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakable. It began with the words, "I'm alive, but I don't think for long." The team stood in silence, overwhelmed by the enormity of the find. This wasn't just evidence, it was a window into the ranger's final days. Why hadn't he tried to make contact with rescue teams? Was he injured, afraid, hiding from something? The discovery brought both answers and new questions. The mystery was no longer just about a missing man. It had become about survival, isolation, and perhaps something more sinister hidden in the vastness of Banff. When forensic teams arrived to collect the contents of the shelter, they treated it like a time capsule, one that held pieces of a life left behind. The ranger's journal, though partially damaged, contained more than just survival notes. As experts carefully dried and scanned the fragile pages, a narrative emerged, one that took a darker and more inexplicable turn than anyone anticipated. According to the entries, David Kessler had indeed survived the initial days after his disappearance. He had fallen during a solo patrol in an uncharted ravine while responding to what he described as unusual noises coming from the eastern forest ridge. The fall had dislocated his shoulder and broken several ribs, making it impossible for him to climb back out. He dragged himself deeper into the ravine, eventually finding an old fire observation shelter that had been decommissioned decades earlier and buried by vegetation. At first, the entries were filled with hope. He rationed supplies, attempted to repair the shelter's radio, and left makeshift trail markers, hoping a search team would find him. But by week 3, the tone shifted. He began describing strange occurrences: voices at night, footsteps circling the shelter, distant lights that blinked in unnatural rhythms. He wrote that he believed someone, or something, was watching him from the trees. He questioned his sanity but insisted he wasn't hallucinating. He sketched crude figures, vaguely humanoid, always seen from afar but never clearly. One entry read, "I heard my name last night. Not like a voice on the wind, closer, intentional. I don't think I'm alone out here." In another, he described a low hum vibrating through the shelter's floor just before the CB radio began emitting the same static and clicking pattern that would later baffle investigators. "The signal isn't mine," he wrote. "It started by itself. I can't shut it off." The final entry was dated 42 days after his disappearance. It simply read, "I'm going outside. They're here." No further pages were found. No human remains were discovered in or near the shelter. Search teams extended their efforts for several kilometers in every direction, but nothing else turned up. No footprints, no clothing, no evidence of an animal attack. It was as if he had simply walked into the forest and vanished once again. Speculation surged. Some believed Kessler had succumbed to isolation and cold. Others were convinced he had been taken by a wild animal, though no signs supported that theory. But among the local community, and especially those familiar with the deep, often unmapped terrain of Banff, rumors began to resurface. Whispers of strange sightings, sounds, and missing persons reports, dating back decades, began to re-emerge. The forest had always held its secrets. Maybe it had claimed David Kessler in a way no one could ever understand. The official case of David Kessler's disappearance remains unsolved. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police closed the active investigation 2 years after the discovery of the shelter, citing lack of further evidence. The journal was archived, but never released to the public in full. The pages that leaked online were dismissed by officials as possibly altered or fabricated, though those close to the original investigation quietly confirmed their authenticity. What happened in that ravine, and what caused the CB radio to emit static every April 6th at exactly 11:09 p.m., remains unexplained. Even after the radio was disconnected and locked in a storage facility, the eerie pattern was picked up by amateur radio enthusiasts in surrounding areas. Some say the frequency doesn't just play static, but intermittent whispers, syllables that seem to mimic David's voice from his ranger logs. Audio experts have reviewed the signal, and while most dismiss it as pareidolia, a few claim there's something deliberate beneath the noise. Locals in Banff began calling that date the Ranger's Hour. Every year, a small crowd gathers at the trailhead near the eastern ridge to light candles and leave ranger patches at the signpost that still bears David's name. It's not an official ceremony. There are no speeches, no news cameras, just quiet remembrance. Kessler's parents both passed away in the early 2000s, never knowing what truly happened to their son. His sister, now in her late 60s, still returns each spring to the spot where he was last seen. In an interview, she once said, "I don't believe he died that day. I think something happened that changed the course of his life. And maybe ours, too." In the years since, other disappearances have been quietly reported in areas near the same ravine. Hikers vanishing without a trace, campers hearing voices at night. Some even claimed their radios picked up the static, followed by a man's voice whispering a single phrase. Still here, true believers in the supernatural have latched onto the story. Documentaries have been made. Podcasts dissect the case down to every known detail. Theories range from secret military testing to time slips, forest spirits, and alternate dimensions. Skeptics scoff, calling it just another cold case inflated by folklore. But those who live in Banff, especially the old rangers who knew David, rarely speak his name. Not out of fear, but out of respect. Because in their hearts, they know the forest remembers. And every year, when the air turns still and the radio crackles, they feel a presence in the trees. Watching. Waiting. David Kessler may be gone, but his story lives on, etched into the shadows of a wilderness that refuses to let go of its secrets.